at the risk of dating myself, at the first part of my career, I was a full stack developer, and there was no jQuery back then. We used to use there was no Bootstrap. Ajax had just started, and I was using frameworks like Prototype.js, YUI, and Dojo, and IE was the leading browser in the market. So yeah, I've sort of gone through that experience of cross-browser compatibility with Netscape and IE, and sort of managing compatibility back then. I understand the pain, and I've sort of had a really interesting experience here at BrowserStack, going from product into marketing. As a product manager, I've spoken to hundreds of customers, right? Both paying customers and open source users who use BrowserStack to test their projects. And one of the things that all of us here today, right, is we all want to move fast and break things, right? Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook was famous for saying this. He said it 15 years ago when everyone in the valley, everyone in tech lived it. And if you weren't breaking things in production, you weren't moving fast enough. Right? Releasing software which was working was better than releasing perfect software. So take Facebook as an example, right? They had a minor oversight, which led to millions of dollars in losses per minute, right? And when this happened, Mark Zuckerberg realized that fixing a bug in production is a lot more expensive, and it's actually slowing them down in the long run. What Mark realized is that we have to move fast and not break things. And this is what we believe, right? That we no longer can believe in just moving fast and breaking things. We have to be very careful about the impact that our bugs have in production, right? So it's really important to move fast, but not break things. Breaking things is not okay. So today's most successful companies move fast without breaking things, right? Companies that win have one thing in common, right? Trailblazers like Amazon, Netflix, and Adidas all ship code to production hundreds or thousands of times a day, right? Adidas deploys to 50 plus markets globally every day. On the flip side, you have companies paying a really heavy price for breaking things, right? Let's take an example of Knight Capital, which actually went bankrupt due to $460 million of error trades. This was basically a deployment issue, and some legacy code crept into production. And they weren't able to kill these erroneous trades. And after 45 minutes, they were able to stop it. But by that time, they already lost $460 million, and the firm essentially went bankrupt, right? There are countless examples of the cost of poor quality or of breaking things in production, right? They all share one takeaway: bugs on production are bad for business, right? Each of these three failures could have been prevented with the right mechanisms and the right testing processes in place. So how do you move fast and without breaking things, right? So I wanted to share some of the insights that we've come up with at BrowserStack, where we observed some of the best teams in the world using our platform to test. Before I do that, I wanted to sort of share some context. We're kind of a big deal. No, actually, just kidding. But seriously, we have 25,000 plus dev and QA teams ship quality software at speed. And our cloud infrastructure of over 2,000 plus real devices and browsers powers these 25,000 companies. Our insights are based on over 2 million users who are registered on our platform, who run over 72 billion commands every year, Selenium commands every year on our platform. We have customers from over 135 countries, and we have customers running tests on our 15 globally distributed data centers. We're used by some of the best brands, biggest brands in the world across different sectors, from finance to technology to media. And we also power some of the biggest open source projects on our platform, like jQuery, Angular, Ember, Discourse, and many more. So, all right, let's get to some data. I've shared a lot of data. I've shared a lot of sort of insights about BrowserStack and how we extracted this data. So let's share some of these data points now with you. All right. So what we did is we looked at how customers are using our platform, how users are testing on our platform, and we sort of classified these companies into innovators and later adopters, right? And what we use is indicators such as the Alexa rank and the release frequency to understand which teams are on the cutting edge of testing and which teams are maybe not on the journey there. Some of the key characteristics that we identified for innovators were the basic thing, which is the number of tests per day, right? So innovators are running a lot more tests than your late adopters, running 12 times more tests. They're running 40 times more builds every day. And each build is actually 9 times faster on average than your late adopters. Each build is also 5 times smaller. So what we learned is not only are their builds faster, and not only are they running more tests, but they're actually breaking their tests into smaller and smaller builds, which makes it much more manageable. They're running on more browser and device combinations. So, they are testing for a lot more user environments, across our platform. Their failure rates are 4 times lower on average than late adopters, right? So what this means is that, they've sort of done the hard work of building a Selenium test suite or an automated test suite, which is stable, which is, able to sort of, obviously in the early part of your release cycle, you might be catching more and more bugs, but as your software matures and your sort of release gets more stable, you should be finding fewer and fewer failures, right? And the best sort of companies are finding much lower failure rates on our platform. They also run a lot fewer manual tests, right? So they are relying more and more on automation, right? And I understand, I know that, automating everything is a bit of a pipe dream, right? I think all of us are aspiring for that, but we know that it's, close to impossible, if not impossible, to get 100% automation in place. But the goal is to get as much automation in place as possible and keep the manual testing to a minimum. So let's summarize some of the insights that we've gone through so far. So what are some of the key characteristics of innovators, right? So they test more often, they're running on more builds, they're running more builds every day. They test more, which means they're running more tests, and they're also testing on more browser and device combinations. They test smarter, so their builds are smaller and they're faster. They have a lower failure rate, and they're on average automating a lot more of their tests. So let's look at some success stories, right? So I talked about sort of some overall data points across our platform, and how we sort of classified our users into innovators and late adopters, right? So I want to talk about 3 companies, incidentally, all 3 of whom are actually speaking at Breakpoint over the next 4 days. So let's start with Optimizely, right? So Optimizely started with a very simple sort of problem, right? Or very simple sort of objective, right? They wanted to reduce what they call the DPI, which is the developer pain index, right? And they measured that as the median build time divided by the median build success rate, right? And their goal is, I want to get this number down. If this number goes down, that means I'm creating less pain for my developers. How do they do this, right? They moved from headless to real browsers. So they were actually simulating and testing on real user environments. So they weren't, in the situation where they weren't able to replicate a real user environment, right? So you were actually testing your code, so to speak, in the wild, in the way a user would see it. They moved their testing to the cloud, so they were able to scale and not be constrained by, the limits of their internal infrastructure. And they also built their own framework based on Behave. And they were able to sort of run 14,000 plus tests every 45 minutes, right, on the platform. Let's talk about the Weather Channel. So Weather Channel was able to reduce their failure rates on average by 10x. They went from 3 to 4 releases a week to multiple releases a day. And they increased their coverage to test on real mobile devices, right? So they realized, I think Todd, who will be speaking later on, I think tomorrow or day after, talked about how I think around 2016, they realized, the mobile traffic to the Weather Channel increased and crossed over from desktop traffic. And they realized the importance of testing on real browsers and devices, right? And they increased their coverage to make sure that their website and the web app was working perfectly on different mobile browsers. How did they do this, right? So they sort of started releasing smaller features and packaging them in smaller builds. They made sure that during their sprints, they marked a story done only when automation is also written, right, for that feature. And I think they talked about, making sure that we build buy-in and confidence with easy wins, right? Making sure that you're setting up sort of easy small milestones in between sort of your longer process of getting to the stage of going from 3 to 4 releases a week to multiple releases a day, and making sure that you're having frequent test case review meetings to make sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of the kind of test cases you have written and that you want to write. So I think that's just a little bit about some of the insights that we've extracted from our sort of 25,000 plus customers and the 2 million tests that run on our platform every day. I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point, and I'm happy to sort of take any questions that you might have. All right, Q&A. All right, I guess no questions, guys. We have a lot of time to kill, so we've got another 15 minutes. So happy to take any questions. You can use the Q&A button in the Zoom interface. Right, I have a lot of questions now. Okay, let's see if we can start tackling some of these questions. All right. So a question around plans for performance testing. So I think Ritesh sort of covered this in his talk, but I'll reiterate. So we launched a free tool called Speed Lab recently, couple of months ago now. And what it lets you do is test the performance of your website across real browsers and devices, right? Again, it's free and it's in beta. Just go to browserstack.com/speedlab and check it out. And that's sort of our entry to the performance testing market. So I think there are some questions around using AI for visual tests with Percy, and sort of when is Mike's talk starting? So Mike's talk will be starting soon in the next 15 minutes, and Mike I'll let Mike sort of address some of the questions around Percy and visual testing. There's a question around they built a framework. I think I was talking about Optimizely. Question around behavioral testing. I think the question is around is it BDD? So yeah, I think they were using Behave basically. They customized the Behave framework to build their own sort of test framework, and Behave is basically BDD. There's a question around extending support for Puppeteer and Playwright anytime soon. So those are both things that our product team is looking actively into. We just launched support for Cypress, and we will be looking at other sort of test frameworks and testing tools, right? So I think our goal is to support what works in the developer workflow, right? So whatever tool or framework that you are using in your developer workflow, we want to be able to support that and allow you to run your tests on our platform. So we are definitely evaluating more and more frameworks. Some questions around the popular frameworks used on BrowserStack. I think we've got actually support for a lot of frameworks. I would say overall we have a lot of users using frameworks based on Java and on Node, right? So frameworks like JUnit and TestNG with Java, and then we've got frameworks like WebDriver.io. We've got frameworks like Nightwatch, frameworks like Protractor, all which are JavaScript based. So those are some of the more popular frameworks that are used. So a question around how we got our data about builds, frequency, and length. Some of the data points that I walked through. So yeah, I think we we obviously have four main products, right? And then recently we launched Percy and SpeedLab, but we've got manual testing with Live, automated testing with Automate, and the insights that I shared with you are primarily based on the way users are using Automate product, using our Automate platform. A lot of users who use Automate also use Live, right, for some of their smoke tests, maybe tests that they run on pre-prod or right when they ship to production. So we were able to compare, how some of the best teams are using Automate, look at them and look at their corresponding behavior on Live and see how are they doing manual testing. That's how we sort of figure this information out. So I think there are some great questions around flaky Selenium tests. What are the sizes of development teams? And sort of some best practices around how to plan your sprints. So I want you guys to sort of hold on to those questions. I think those are really great questions. We have sessions through the next 3 to 4 days, next 4 days, where we will be covering some of these, right? So we have David Burns, who's a core contributor to the Selenium project, who will be talking about Selenium, who will be talking about, how do I reduce flakiness, some of the sort of the best practices there. So I want to let him talk about that. Just going through the questions, folks, lots of questions. So there's a question around security. How are we managing security of all of your data, all of your customer data, which is really, really important to us, right? So BrowserStack is SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. We are also Privacy Shield compliant, and we follow all the GDPR rules and regulations. We also have a very strict process of cleaning up every browser and device once the test is completed. We basically wipe the entire environment, make sure that none of the customer data that you have, none of your data, test data, is stored on that browser or that environment, right? So we clear everything, we clear all the cache, any files that you might have downloaded, any history, all of that is cleaned up completely. And we have a checklist that we go through automatically, right, before we allocate a browser or a device to the next user. And if any check in that checklist fails, then we take that device or browser out of the pool. The question around SpeedLab and whether it tests mobile app performance. So right now, no, it's just for websites. It does test your website's performance on desktop browsers and mobile browsers on our real mobile devices. We are looking at how we can add performance testing for, mobile apps. SpeedLab is free. There's a question around whether SpeedLab costs anything. SpeedLab is free. So browserstack.com/SpeedLab. You guys can check it out there. So I think there are some more questions around more details around the presentation that I went through around how the best teams automate and how the best teams ship rate software. So I would again urge all of you to sort of stay tuned. We have individual sort of talks around from some of these teams, right? From actually all of these teams that I spoke about in my presentation. They will be talking about in detail what they do with their teams to meet some of their objectives and share their best practices with you. There's a question around, is BrowserStack open source? No, we are not, but we do support open source projects. So you can visit our open source page. Again, I will share the link here in the chat. And like I said, we sponsor over 2,000 open source projects that use BrowserStack to test their open source projects. Great, so I'm gonna take a pause while we spool up for the next session, which was gonna be automating visual testing with Percy by Mike.